Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Wow. You guys respond quickly. Thank you. Hopefully the day is continuing to go well at the Hire Smart event. Everybody enjoying themselves, learning some good information? Great. Well, we have our next session that we're going to get started. Excited to introduce Carrie Radovich. She is executive coach and corporate trainer. She has her own company of coaching, consulting, and training. And over the last week, we have been conversing across the pond as she was traveling in Europe. So we're very excited that she made the trip all the way back just in time to be with us here today. So we're very excited about a very important topic, how to be the best boss you can be. So please help me welcome Carrie to the presentation today.
Thanks, everybody. And in case my brain goes a little bit foggy at any point, I am still experiencing some jet lag. Woke up at 3 o'clock this morning, couldn't fall back asleep. So we'll see how the caffeine's going to work for me. Welcome to the people who are here in the room. Welcome to the people who are coming through the web. I'm so excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is how to be a great boss. So a lot of you left corporate America where you had bosses and now you're the boss. So hopefully we'll get to talk about some interesting topics on that. So a little bit about me first. So I spent 17 years in corporate America. I started out of college at an ad agency in account management, and then I made a jump over to publishing. And what brought me to the Bay Area 15 years ago was actually Fortune magazine. And I ended up running the sales organization, the ad sales organization for Fortune here on the Pacific Northwest. So I had a background in big company experience. How many people came from big companies? Most of you. Other people, serial entrepreneurs? I'm jealous of you. I'm jealous. That was always where I wanted to go, but I was a little bit traditional in my career path and I was nervous about doing that. But after 17 years, I got tired of it, and I started coaching in 2003. And so what I do in my coaching work is I do a combination of one-on-one executive coaching where a company will hire me to coach their key leaders and develop them into better leaders and bosses. And the companies also hire me to do training, whether that's group work or emotional intelligence work or sales training. So I do a combination of individual work and group work. And it's actually from this experience that I called the conclusions that I'm going to talk to you today about in terms of how to be a great boss. So I see 4 keys when I look at my business, what I'm coaching people on, that really help people be a great boss. The first is having a vision. The next is what I call ask, don't tell. The third is creating a culture of feedback. And the fourth is being human, which sometimes is the hardest one of the 4. So I'll take them one by one. So having a vision is so incredibly important. I'm going to tell you a story about how important it is. I've done work for about 4 years with a company where I work very closely with the CEO, and I work with his entire management team. And this guy has been amazing about creating a vision, holding the vision, talking about the vision, everything, every day, every way. This guy is all about his vision. So about a month ago, he leaves the company. And I have a meeting with his key leadership team. Now, the guy's been gone 2 weeks, and we're just in a conversation about the impact of his being gone. And the first person raises their hand and says, "We don't have any vision anymore." Now, he's only been gone 2 weeks, but they're so used to hearing the vision being told and espoused and lived in their company that when they're without it for 2 weeks, they feel lost. And so what's really important about vision is it creates a sense of safety and rowing in the same direction. Also, I do a lot of work with middle managers, and I've actually hear this all the time from middle managers. Our company doesn't have a vision. I don't even care if it changes, but I just would love to know where we're headed. It's that important for your employees to really know what your vision is. So when you're creating it, be really clear about it, like the CEO I was talking about. Talk about it a lot, be really clear about where you're headed, even if it changes down the road. Set that vision and course and really row behind it. Repeat, repeat, repeat. That vision needs to be drummed into the culture. And I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that has taken place. You don't know how many times I hear people say, well, I thought I was communicating the vision, but I'm having middle management people come to me and say, I don't know what our vision is. So you can't say it enough. Oops, pressed it too hard. Make sure you enroll your people in the vision. Have them feel a part of it. Ask them for their input. Have them help you shape the future of your vision. Have it be something that lives in the organization, not just sits up on the wall. The next key to being a great boss is what I call ask, don't tell. So how many overachievers do we have in the audience? A few, right? So we overachievers like to tell people what we know and tell people what to do, right? Because that's what got us ahead in corporate, or maybe when we started our business, I know the right thing and I'm going to tell you the right thing to do, right? Not the best way to be a best boss. The best bosses actually ask their people. They don't necessarily tell them. And one of the biggest complaints I hear on 360s when I do it in big companies is the employees saying, you know, my boss always tells me how to do it. Can I just do it the way I want to do it? So the first way to employ ask, don't tell is to employ curiosity. Ask people, so how would you do this? How would you tackle the problem? What got you to that conclusion? Employ the use of powerful questions and curiosity when engaging your employee in the work. I like to tell anybody I coach, small businesses, big businesses, give them the what and the when, right? What do we need delivered and when do we need to buy? And let them figure out the how. It's really empowering for people to do it their own way. Even if they fail, it's a great learning experience, and they'll embrace the process so much more if you let them do it their way. It's another big thing that comes up on 360s is, I wish he would just stop telling me how to do it. I just want to do it my way. Listen, listen, and listen. I should have written it 3 times. It's that important. This statistic is astounding when you think about it, that 85% of people will go along with your idea as long as they felt like they were heard. It's an astounding statistic, right? So if you actually listen to your employees, hear them out, see what their ideas are, even if you end up following the idea that you put forth, they're going to align around it better because they were heard. The other thing is you might get an idea that's better than your own. God forbid, right? So the third key is what I call creating a culture of feedback. And I love this quote from Ken Blanchard, that feedback is the breakfast of champions. And he's a well-known management consultant who wrote The 1 Minute Manager. And it's such an important thing because if we don't know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, how do we get better? So the first thing I tell people when creating a culture of feedback is reframe feedback as a gift, right? So offering feedback, especially if it's constructive, with the idea of this is in service of your growth. This is in service of your understanding how you can do better. Or this is in service of my just telling you did an amazing job on something. And so what's important on the gift reframe is that you're doing it in the right tone and manner. So that's an important part of this one. Also, don't forget the positive as well as the constructive. And the story I like to tell about this one is internationally, Americans are kind of known as so positive and always complimenting each other. And I coach a lot of Europeans, and they always say, what is this thing? You always have to say these nice things to each other. I don't understand the American thing, right? So he was from Belgium, this particular guy, but Germany can sometimes have that too. But it was funny because I gave him homework, and his homework was to give each of his employees 1 compliment that week, just 1. Something true and authentic, right, but positive feedback. So he came back the next week to our meeting and he said, first of all, it was the hardest thing I ever did. Like it felt really unnatural. That's not what we do culturally. So I had to really stretch. And I said, good, stretching's good. I'm glad you stretched. I said, what did you see the impact? And he said, it was actually astounding. They lit up like little flowers and they worked harder and they were nicer to me. And I said, yeah, see, it's free. And it has incredibly positive effects when you don't forget to tell your people the great stuff they're doing. Also, constructive is as important as positive. But I always tell my clients, make sure you're doing both. Also formal and informal. So I know a lot of you have very, very small businesses, but even if you only have one employee, don't forget that having a yearly official review is a great idea. It gives somebody something that they know they're going to have some signpost that's official, that you're going to sit down and talk in depth about their development. It does not have to be complicated. It could be as simple as, what do I want you to start doing, stop doing, and keep doing? You don't need a big formal evaluation form. You don't need a lot of bells and whistles. But you want a forum at least once a year where you're talking to your employees about how they're doing. But the bigger one for me is the informal. I'm a huge believer that if somebody's hearing feedback for the first time at a formal review, it's your failure, not theirs. And so what I like to do to encourage with my clients is to have them kind of just create this, flow that they do with their employees, where after a meeting or a project or something that you're working with your employee on, ask them, so how do you think that went? And what would you do differently, if anything? I had a boss at my ad agency who did that after every single meeting with me. And what was so amazing is I was always clear how I was doing, and I got to learn right there on the spot. I didn't have to think 6 months back to that one presentation that maybe I didn't do as well as I should have. And it took this whole angst out of giving feedback right out of the system, because it's just something we did. And I actually gave this tip to a sales organization that I work with. And the sales manager said he does it after every meeting now. And this is the guy who I could not sandblast into giving feedback to his people because he was so conflict averse. And he said, it's not even scary anymore. It's just part of what we do. So it's a big one that I feel strongly about. And if you can financially do some stuff for your employees to help them work on the areas that you know they need development on, and you can write it off for your business, do that. Employees really value that, and they know it means you're investing in them. Now, I know not all of you can do that. You might not be in the financial position that you can do that. So if you can't financially support their development, then model it for them. You go take those classes. You go keep developing, and show them the kinds of model the kind of behavior that you'd love for them to do as well. So the fourth one, be human. Sometimes I think this is the hardest one. So the being versus the doing, right? We all got ahead. We're all successful because we did a lot, and we're about achievement and results. But what's interesting is how we show up for things is in many ways more important than what we do or what we say. Great example, CEO I've been coaching for a number of years used to come to the meetings, and he'd say to me, okay, so Carrie, we're going to script what I need to say to my board today. Or let's script what I need to say to my employees about the change that's happening. And I would say, well, slow down. Before we start scripting, how do you want to show up? What is the impact you want them to feel from that meeting? And he was very confused by this. What are you talking about? Just let's write the script. So I kept forcing him to, think about how he wanted, the impact he wanted it to have in the room emotionally, how he wanted to show up. 4.5 years later, he said to me, I finally get that thing, that if I know how I'm going to be in the room, what I say comes naturally. So he just bought a new company, and I met with him a couple of weeks ago, and he said, so let's talk about how I'm going to show up with my new employees. I thought, oh, yay, you got it. So being versus doing, big, important part. Superhuman isn't helpful. How many of you have done superhuman things to get your businesses going, or when you were in corporate America, right? All-nighters, no sleep, right? And as a boss, if you do that superhuman thing and they never see the reality of work, they never see your vulnerability, your human side, you're not doing them any favors. I always give the example of my own fault as a boss when I was working at Fortune. I came from the era of business where you never let them see you sweat. Don't let them see emotion. Don't let them see you crack. Don't let them see anything. Just keep steaming ahead. And I realized I was creating this unattainable model for my people. I was getting in at 7 in the morning. I was leaving at 9 at night. And these people are trying to keep up with that because that's what I'm modeling for them. And they start showing up at 7 o'clock or 7:15, and I'm thinking, like, what is happening? And I realized I was modeling it. And so really being mindful that people follow your lead, and if you're not being real and human, you're not providing them the best model. Connection is key. You have no idea how many people I coach who deliver amazing results, and they're the top of their game. And they come to me for coaching because they're not connecting to their people. And if people can't feel connected to you, you're not going to create effective followership for the long term. So connection it's kind of simple. When I was in sales, they used to say, people like to buy from people they like. And what I always say to my coaching clients is, people like to work for people they like, and they work harder for people they like. So spend time connecting with your people, because it's a really important element that we forget to take time for because we're so busy. And I put this one as a separate one because I think it's important enough. If that doesn't come naturally, if connecting and making that time doesn't come naturally, schedule it. Now, here's a funny story. I have a couple of people who are so bad at slowing down to spend time with their employees that I have them write it in their Outlook calendar. And I have one guy who, Wednesdays at 2 o'clock, he gets up and he visits the desk of his 5 employees just to make sure that they're doing well connecting. I have other ones that say, once a month I'm going to take each of my employees out to lunch. If you're not good at doing that as a natural kind of personality trait that you have, schedule it. Don't be afraid to do it. It's that important. When I talk about being human, I also like to give people this tip. Create a model to emulate. So maybe there is a boss you used to work for, or a business leader you admire, or maybe there's a composite of kinds of a little bit from this guy and a little bit from that guy. Create a model that you can follow for the kind of boss you want to be. I always say look for the qualities and attributes, like I was talking about in the other slide about the being versus doing. What does that person embody? How do I feel around that person? Think about those and start to create the model for how you want to be, so that when you get stuck, you can do the classic, what would so-and-so do? So I had a boss at Time Inc. His name was Jack Harry. He was amazing. I wanted to walk on hot coals for this guy because he was just incredibly humble but bright and connected, and he took time. You were the most important person in the room when you were talking to him, yet he was way up in the organization. And when I would get stuck, when I was running my own team, I would think to myself, what would Jack do? And so I used that model to really drive my own behavior as a boss. And it was really helpful for me to have that kind of living, breathing model to work with. So in closing, I want to tell you one important thing about being a boss. You are having an impact all of the time. So you might as well be intentional about it. You're creating your brand, you're creating your leadership legacy in every interaction you have with your employee, whether it's 1, 10, or 100. And so my advice to you is to be really intentional about it. Spend time thinking about your relationships with your people and employ those 4 keys that I talked about. And thank you so much for being with me, and I'm happy to take any questions. They're going to give you a mic.
You spoke about connection. What are the limitations to that connection? Because you can be too connected sometimes and it becomes more of a friend issue, so that now you don't have that employee who wants to follow what you say because they know a little more than they should.
Gotcha.
What are those parameters that one should look to
keep?
Yes.
It's a great question. And it's about, you're really talking about boundaries, right? Is how do I connect, have them feel my humanity, but not get so familiar that I become like their buddy? And so I guess my advice there would be is, you know how you can feel when you've crossed a line, when somebody knows a little bit too much, or you've been a little bit like in the TMI camp, right? Is tread 2 steps behind that line. Right? So you want to connect, you want to ask them about their family, you want to talk about yours, but you may not tell them every deep, dark secret you have. You want to step just shy of that line so that you still keep that boundary of, I'm the decision maker and ultimately the boss, but that they feel like they would walk on hot coals for you, that they'd want to do anything for you. And sometimes it's more of an art than a science. But if you start to think like, that was probably a little bit too much to tell them, you probably just found that boundary.
Hi, thank you. So one of the questions I have is, a lot of small business owners like myself are thinking about for the first time what kind of culture you really want to create for your company. And my question for you is, what's your perspective on creating a culture that is non-hierarchical? So a lot of the new kind of modern companies try to be a little bit more flat rather than kind of have these vertical hierarchies. And I wanted to know kind of what do you think the pros and cons of that are?
So I do come across that. I think what's key in those organizations where people have a desire for it to be flat, I actually applaud that because I think sometimes hierarchy can create odd dynamics that don't need to be. But to kind of harken back to the question before, you want to still have some semblance of boundaries so that it's not anarchy. I think in creating a culture that doesn't have a lot of hierarchy, I think you have to employ a lot of people who think a lot like you do and want that. You'd be surprised, I don't know if you've encountered this, how many people want to be told, I'm doing this, you're doing that, right? I'm seeing a lot of head nodding, right? And so if you're going to have a flat organization, those aren't the right people probably for your organization. But I think when doing the flatter organization, it's about getting the right kinds of people who want that kind of culture and also still being mindful of the boundaries that could make things a little bit chaotic. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Great.
We have one question online.
Great.
This person would like to know how you would handle communicating with employees about problem clients. In other words, you and your employees both know the client is driving everyone crazy. How do you stay professional and positive and not look like you're complaining and present that professional demeanor for your employees?
So in this instance, I'm talking about a client to my employees, or am I talking to the client?
I think their question, yes, is about talking to employees about a problem client.
Gotcha. Yes. So I think it goes back to your original question, too. You want to find that fine line with not being too denigrating about your clients, right? Your clients are your lifeblood. We used to have a joke in sales. Yeah, our jobs would be easy except for those clients, right? But I think you want to be very mindful of staying professional because you're modeling how they're going to behave then with other employees and with your clients. So I would refrain from denigrating. I would try and I'm a kind of a positive person, so I always try and say, well, okay, we've got a challenge with this client. How do we solve it? As opposed to that client, I can't believe he's such a hassle. I'm a big believer in keeping that out of the relationship because you'll start to create that culture and that poison in the fabric of your employees, and it could kind of come back, circle around to bite you.
I had an incident with one of our managers. She got divorced, and I'm not the sympathetic, crybaby kind of person type. So it was hard to deal with the situation with her. She's been with him from the beginning, and I felt like I said, just be quiet, move forward. He's dead, move on. But I couldn't, and I tried to be somewhat sympathetic towards her, but I know how to deal with the situation. And so what would you recommend in that situation? Do I get her counseling or church or, I don't know. So
it was going on and on, is that it?
No. She'd get crying.
Gotcha. So, I'll tell you a personal story on this one. When I was, 24 or whatever, my grandmother died when I was working at my big ad agency. And it really threw me for a loop. I was very close to my grandmother. It was a shock. And I was having trouble recovering. Now, I wasn't doing the crying, complaining thing. But my boss noticed that I was kind of moping around. And he came in my office and he said to me, this is one of the best bosses I've ever worked for. He said, here's the deal. You're a superstar. And I know that about you. And right now, I know you're hurting. Here's what I would suggest is do your best to compartmentalize that in your hours you're not here. And when you're here, just be you. And see if you can work that compartmentalization thing a little bit and try it. It's a great business skill, he said. boy, I took that to the bank, and I used it for lots of other instances that happened later in my life that were a lot more jarring than my grandmother dying, right? And if you're finding that she's not able to compartmentalize, you can say, maybe it sounds like you need to talk to a grief counselor or somebody in therapy because you had a loss. And so don't be shy to say, this is outside of my pay scale. Maybe there's some resources that can help you get some additional support.
I have a question about this create a culture of feedback. I do think it is such a great, very effective tool to have a informal, formal that recognize in the positive and just say simple things and all that. And in that, one of the bullet point was the formal and the informal.
Yes.
And you mentioned the performance review.
Mm-hmm.
Being a small company, I think, and I do have both experience of corporate America and a small company. What is your take on keeping a record of the performance review? Does it matter if it's a small company?
Well, I guess what I would say to that is I'm guessing that one day you either want to continue to grow your company or potentially grow it and sell it. And so I kind of adopt the philosophy of act like the kind of company that you ultimately want to be. And so if you want to be a company that's a larger, kind of more established company, I would consider keeping those files kind of as a record and a regular thing, not in necessarily a punitive way, but more of having employee records, especially if somebody stays with you a really long time and say you sell the company in 10 years and that person's still with you. I think it shows your commitment to the employee. So I kind of believe that your formal, especially in a small company, your formal evaluations don't have to be complicated, but I think they need to be regular. And I would keep them. Mm-hmm.
So I've noticed some of the management styles and some of the people that I work with and have worked with in the past. Think about a situation where maybe you're a step level above an individual, so there's a manager in between.
Uh-huh.
And you notice that maybe that manager isn't necessarily incredibly effective. And the person who she's managing is decided to stay there. And it's more or less, in corporate America, right? Maybe not so much in a small business, but is training that she's blocked from communicating up either to adjacent levels or a step level above. And so, as maybe someone either directly above or adjacent to that situation, how do you intercede without usurping the control of that manager who's not necessarily being effective, but yet still come to the aid of the employees so you don't lose them, essentially?
Yep. I'm a huge believer in skip level meetings as part of your practice so that you never lose touch once you start growing and you've got layers below you. You never lose touch with the ground. And so it's a great way to be able to also check on that middle management level. How is this person getting supported by that person? So just make it a standard practice in your company. Hey, every 6 months I'm going to do a skip level, or every 3 months I'm going to do a skip level. We'll go to lunch, we'll go to coffee, we'll check in. I highly recommend it because you can head off a lot of management issues by being in touch with that ground level.
All right, I apologize. A lot of great questions, a lot of great information. Unfortunately, we're going to keep the day moving. We're going to be setting up for the small business panel. So please join me in thanking Carrie for a really great presentation this afternoon. Refreshments and things outside. If you want to go out, take a break. We'll be setting up for the small business panel at about 2:15, 2:20. We'll start that.